What's up, guys? Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the zombies!
I am Michael, and I am here with Austin. Austin, how you doing?
Yo, what up? I'm well.
Ryan. Ryan, what's up?
What's going on, film fans?
Yeah, and we have a very, very, very special guest today. Dave Sirus, who's one of the writers of the new Judd Apatow, Pete Davidson film, The King of Staten Island. Dave, how are you?
Good, thank you. Good enough.
Awesome.
Welcome, man.
Good enough.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So if anyone noticed, Ryan did yell something about zombies, and you might just be thinking it's Ryan doing a Ryan bit, but it's a tie-in. It's a tie-in to today's film, which is 28 Days Later. A Danny Boyle film, a sort of post-apocalyptic zombie classic. I will admit that I watched it for the first time for this, so my take will be full of ignorance. But
I was just going to say that. I'm surprised because you lived in the UK for like 5 years too, so...
We can talk about why I haven't seen it if we need to, but for the time being, I'm curious to hear what you all think about this film. I imagine all of you have seen it, I'll say multiple times. So, Austin, let's start with you. What's your initial take on 28 Days Later?
First time you saw it and this time you saw it.
Yeah, so again, I too lived in the UK for a long time, and so this was like a classic that I had to see, right? I think it was listed as like one of the 100 greatest British films of all time or something like that, and people really ride Danny Boyle's dick in the UK, especially if you work in the film industry. So I was like, all right, I guess I got to see this film. So it was super, super, super hyped up, and I fell in love with it when I first saw it because it was the first time that I had really seen the fast zombie thing, right? Which was a big issue.
Oh, yeah.
I loved how gritty it was. I loved the cinematography. There's that one bit where they're driving in the taxi and the fucking like poppy fields are all surrealist and Van Gogh-y or some shit that I was like, oh my God, there's just some really unique techniques even in a relatively kind of low budget film, right? I remember I was blown away. How the fuck did they get the streets of London so freaking quiet? I was like, how did that happen at the beginning? I was like, holy shit, man. So I think from a formal perspective, I thought it was interesting. And then, of course, Cillian Murphy is one of my favorite actors. The Wind That Shakes the Barley is one of my favorite movies of all time. And his performance in that film is like, for me, the pinnacle of acting. And so, like, I love Murphy as an actor. And so it ticked all the boxes upon the first viewing, and I've seen it a handful of times since, and I still love it. I am less enamored with it than maybe I was in my first viewing, but that's just because I think, if you bang the same chick 1,000 times, you kind of get tired too, right?
Wow.
So, come on.
There it is. Well, on that note, Dave, what are your thoughts? And I guess the same thing, the question Ryan brought up, first time, last time. What do you think of the film, and how has your perception or take on the film changed between your first time seeing it and your most recent viewing?
Well, the thing about it is when I chose 28 Days Later, I was thinking of 28 Dresses. I'm very sorry.
Oh, that makes
Katherine
sense.
Heigl.
Easy mistake. I get it.
Movie.
Is that the one where she's a bridemaid
Bridemaid.
28 times? Is that the one?
Yeah. It's such a powerful film about weddings that I guess I confused it with the zombie. Well, yeah, sure. I'll talk about the zombie movie.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm not a horror fan. I'm actually a guy who mostly is bored by horror because it to me has always been one of the most repetitive kinds of movie. Like in comedy, if you repeat a joke, you should get destroyed, and you often are. In horror, it seems like a lot of movies just rearrange the same 5 things in different orders with different characters. So 28 Days Later is like such a great movie because one, it's where we get the fast zombie trope from. The only other fast zombie movie is like one much older,
Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Return of the Living Dead, schlockinger movie, which I've seen those and I didn't really respond to them really, to be honest. Only 28 Days Later I found really captured a kind of realistic vision of the zombie world. And the problem with zombie movies is that it's often hard to believe. And they did it in a way that wasn't. It's not supernatural. It's just a disease that realistically made people like crazy, and they run, and that's how you can kind of believe how this could take over, a disease that takes people over. Because every time I watch a zombie movie, if they're moving slowly, you're always just thinking, how could the government be this incompetent to get taken? I mean, it's essentially like it's like being overrun by retirees. Like, who could not deal? If there was a zombie outbreak in your town and you drove for an hour, you just bought yourself a year.
Yeah, that's why, because zombie movies I always think look fun. Like, when I watch the movie Zombieland, even though they're kind of faster, I'm kind of like, oh, dude, that looks really chill. You got this cool family of people that you're with, and Woody Harrelson is funny, and like, I'm like, I want to be in that world. Whereas you watch 28 Days Later, and you're like, I don't want to be in that fucking world. You know?
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Abraham Lincoln's Zombie Hunter.
Oh yeah,
I have. Yes.
Oh yeah.
I want to be clear. I am not confusing that with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. There was another movie called Abraham Lincoln Zombie Hunter.
Oh, I did not see that one.
Maybe I'm confused then.
Yeah, I'm confused too.
Not
Okay, never
Vampire
mind.
Hunter. Not the movie in theaters. A direct-to-Netflix original called Abraham Lincoln Zombie Hunter, where the director and writer of the movie also plays Abraham Lincoln and is about 5'6".
Amazing.
Sick.
And that's a movie where you have soldiers, where like you watch the inherent difficulty of trying to explain how it's possible, because there are scenes where like groups of soldiers with rifles are somehow overtaken by 3 shuffling zombies.
Is this the same director that did like Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters and all of that shit?
No, he's several degrees below that person. That is a schlock fest, and this was someone trying to just rip that off for no budget. And because when you watch these movies, even with fast zombies, you have to realize, like, how could they possibly get overrun by they're idiots. They're morons. They can't use guns. They can't communicate. They can't plan a goddamn thing. If it was really possible to overthrow a government with those people, with like zombies, then why haven't the chimps taken over Brazil?
They're not as bloodthirsty.
Because they're smarter than they're smarter than zombies. Okay. They're stronger than them. There's plenty of them there. They're like, it's like a rodent problem almost there, and you just can't help it. And the reason is because you see, one of the things that they don't understand about zombies is that we don't have a gorilla or ape problem in the world, because we have what's called door technology.
This is a great take, and I'm so excited to talk more about doors. Now, I want to pause here because I really want to dive into this. I'm loving just being a spectator of this conversation. Before we dive deeper, Ryan, what is your just like initial thought takes, first viewing, most recent viewing analysis of 28 Days Later?
Well, unlike Dave, I'm a big horror fan, right? And I get off on the recyclable nature of it all, because at the end of the day, you're not making, this is not The Godfather or anything. You're making event movies. You're making a fucking party that, and yeah, like it's a roller coaster ride. It's a visceral experience. So I like counting the different kills, and even though, I've seen that kind of kill in this movie before, whatever. I'm an aficionado on that kind of thing. However, I agree with you in the sense that zombies, to me, have absolutely played out. I'm a big film fan, but at the same time, I don't know if I could watch a new take on a zombie movie and actually give a shit. Like almost every zombie movie I see is like kind of a meta take on zombies now, and I'm always just kind of like, they're so hard for me to get invested because it's so, we've done this, we've so cliche, and it is hilarious. It was 18 years ago, 20 Days Later came out, and you guys were talking about the fast zombie thing, but that was such a novelty at the time, right? If you think about it, it's almost like it was so simple that no one ever thought about it. Like, wait, oh yeah, zombies that run, that's fucking terrifying, especially if they're in a pack. In that famous scene where they're running through the fucking field and there's like a million of them. I mean, that is, you're in that guy's shoes. I will say, so when I first saw this movie, I was definitely blown away and I dug it. I remember liking it. Every time I've seen it since, I haven't really responded the same way because the visceral roller coaster is over. I've seen the movie. It's kind of like that's the one bad part about horror, is that they're awesome the first time you see it. Then once you've seen all the tricks, it's kind of like, all right, very few horror movies can kind of withstand multiple viewings in my experience. Or opinion, but yeah, 28 Days Later, pretty cool zombie movie. It gives me this sense of dread, and I don't know if it's just because of the fucking coronavirus, and I'm like,
that's
wow, this is like very, way more relevant than I remember the first time I saw it,
Yeah, Ryan, do you think that this is even a zombie film, or is this just a fucking pandemic film? Like, we should think about it more in the lines of Contagion. then we should think, or like Outbreak, then we should think about it in terms of like, Night of the Living Dead or fucking, what was that one with Nicholas Hoult where like their hearts can come back, the recent one? I can't remember, with Teresa Palmer, and it's that zombie film. I can't. Yeah, exactly. It was the fucking Crank meets zombies. Yeah, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
The thing about zombie movies is that like they're not easy to do well.
Right.
I mean, Walking Dead basically gave up and just took the first 5 minutes of 28 Days Later and said, there's just no way to tell this story without the exact same opening. A guy waking up from a coma, and it's all like you just can't even tell the story without that. And the other problem I have with zombie movies is they often take the easy way out. They never want to explain anything. They never want to show what's really going on. They always just want to make it about one little group of people escaping. And 28 days and then weeks later didn't shy away from that. They told the real story of how this happened. And no, it's a hard thing to do right. But I don't know if you saw. I want to say was it called Black Summer, the Netflix series. It was a zombie series that was on Netflix like last summer, and it was like it was terrible in the sense that like it started out good, and then you realize they were just cutting and pasting tropes that did without earning them. Like it was just like it was like it should not be so obvious to me that you watch Walking Dead.
Right.
Walking Dead with other characters.
Yeah.
One last point I would just make on my thing is, or the trope that I am sick of in zombie movies is, and basically what this whole movie's about is the we're being attacked by this crazy supernatural monster force, even though it's not supernatural in this movie, but the real monsters are the people, the other human beings that are our neighbors, and that is, I feel like, in a lot of zombie movies, and it can kind of just go overboard with kind of, I don't know, melodrama.
Remind me on the other side of the synopsis here, Ryan, because there's that bit where they fucking look at the animals in nature and they're like, oh, they're a family. It's like nature is good and humans are really the evil ones. And there's like this Frankenstein thing too, like let's not fuck with technology and shit. So Burns is gonna probably do his little synopsis.
Well,
thing, but then
how about this? I'll
give
give my quick take on it. We'll do the synopsis and then we'll dive deep into this. Y'all are bringing up so many beautiful things. Although I can tell that Ryan has something he wants to say.
I was just going to say Dave had something to say, so I was going to hear what he had to say.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that Ryan had something to say,
no,
too.
No, Dave. So. I was talking to Dave, not you, Austin.
Okay, you know what? Shut up. We'll get the summary and then we'll get into it. I'll just quickly say I can't do a first time, most recent time. This is the first time I've ever seen it. Liked it. I'm someone who's not watched many horror films, has not watched many zombie films. I'm an outsider to the genre. I really enjoyed it from a filmmaking perspective, especially Austin, you mentioned that scene of an empty London with Cillian Murphy walking around at first. Really, really liked that. But I think my brain was really interested, and obviously I haven't seen the sequel. I want to see the sequel because it seems like that's going to answer the questions I was just thinking about the whole time. I wanted to know what the hell was happening outside of the area of England from London to Manchester, which I think is about like 100 miles or so. I was wondering what's happening in the rest of the world.
You're going to have to watch 28 Dresses Later for that, dude.
Hey, there's not enough Katherine Heigl movies for me in this world, especially the one.
Hey, I will say, people talk shit about 28 Weeks Later, but I actually think that it is really good.
Well, I saw Notorious House Flipper Jeremy Renner was in it, so that made me want to watch it even more.
Oh, that's right. He is.
He's digging that movie. And the whole thing about 28 Weeks Later is that what's good about it is they don't take the easy way out. They actually show the real government response and how the government realistically would retake the world because they're idiots. Fighting morons. They can't even pull a trigger.
Oh, I love it. So
I'll tell you, they are at a distinct disadvantage.
I completely
okay, so I'm gonna leave and watch that. You guys do this. I'm gonna watch 28 Days Later. So let's set the synopsis real quick and get into it. And this is, if you're listening to this and you either haven't seen the movie in a while or you're like me and you never saw it until recently. Quick breakdown, 28 Days Later. Beginning of the movie, this is the sort of inciting incident of the whole thing. We got some hippies breaking into a primate research center, although they seem like kind of badass hippies because they're willing to do crime. We find out there's some apes that have a disease. What is the disease, you might ask? The creepy scientist says, it's rage! I did find that pretty funny. Rage-filled thing gets out. 28 Days Later, we got our guy Jim. So this dude wakes up inside of a hospital. London's empty, walks around, gets attacked by a priest. That was maybe a commentary on Catholicism and predation of priests. I don't know, but that happens. Pretty soon our guy meets up with his little cell group of friends, learn what's happened. A pandemic has taken over the world. People have been turned into, as you all have phrases before, fast zombies. They get together. Guys got to see if his parents are dead. They are. We lose someone along the way, but alas, we see some Christmas lights. And the Christmas lights lead us to our 4-part friend group. We get Frank and Hannah, father and daughter. The whole gang gets together, and because of a broadcast telling them to go to Manchester where the soldiers have the cure for the infection, it turns into a road trip movie for the middle third. I will say that I really enjoyed the road trip part of the movie.
Yeah, me too.
We eventually get to this fortified military base outside Manchester, which is a city on fire, and pretty soon we find out things are not as good as they seem, because what is the cure to infection? It is, correct me if I'm wrong, rape. And using the women who have survived to reproduce and rebuild society.
That's their survival technique. Yeah, keep going.
Yes, that's how we survive. Our bud Jim does not like this. So he rebels, gets thrown out into the woods somehow, and we can talk about this, with handcuffs on, manages to escape and come back fighting. Eventually, all of our mean soldier guys are killed off. Jim and the gals get back together, and by the end of the movie, which I thought was very lovely, we're in a lovely cottage. Austin, I don't know where it looked like that was to you, maybe the Lake District or something like that.
Yeah, totally the Lake District. Loved it. Yeah, it made my soul happy because I want to be there.
Yeah, our trio ends up in the Lake District. We find out that these zombies have a limit on how long they can go without starving to death. They're starving in the streets, and I think it is, correct me if I'm wrong, a Finnish airplane is flying over. And
is it Finnish?
I think it's Finnish. As an expert on Scandinavian dialects, that's not true. But at the very end, our trio's together. The women did not have sex forced upon them by the Manchester soldiers. They have used the dresses they were dressed up in by these evil men to create
27 of them.
27 dresses. Oh, see, it comes full circle.
Yeah.
They put the dresses together to make a help sign in hopes that the Finnish Air Force, notorious Finnish Air Force, by the way, we can get into that, will rescue them. And it's a pretty clear setup for a sequel. You guys have seen the sequel. I have not. But that's the movie. You've probably seen it, though, if you're listening to this, because everyone on the planet had 18 years to watch it except me. Before we keep going, I want to take a second to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Skillshare. I don't know about you guys, but I've been spending a lot more time at home recently, and it's starting to make me feel like I'm getting into a bit of a lethargic funk. But one of the things that's helped snap me out of this is focusing on my creative side and learning something new. And that's why Skillshare is so useful in times like these. It's an online learning community for creatives where millions of people are coming together to take the next step in their creative journeys. They offer tons of different classes, from graphic design to music production and fine art. I've been checking out filmmaking from home, turned found footage into a compelling video taught by Penny Lane. It's been awesome to see how I can use stuff I already have to make really cool looking videos. And if you visit Skillshare.com/Wisecrack today, you can get 2 free months of premium membership. So why waste another day rewatching a series you've already seen 8 times when you could be learning something new? Visit Skillshare.com/Wisecrack today and start your free membership. Now, back to the show. So let's get into it. So much good stuff came in that discussion. How about Dave? Do you want to get us started? Is there any particular point you want to bring up? Any idea in the film that you were excited to talk about?
I mean,
Balls in your
I
court.
agree that it's done to death, the idea that the whole plot is always, but the people are the real enemy. But this was also before that was a trope. Before that, it's like such a common thing that it's just too bad that everyone has only been able to tell a zombie story by leaning on that, and usually in a much less serious and believable way. But I mean, what I like about it is also just that it uses the very simple idea that at their core, a zombie story is the opposite of a vampire movie. Vampires are about the fear of aristocrats, and zombie movies are about the aristocrats' fear of the proletariat.
The proletariat, baby!
So
there's a lot of good Marxist literature on zombie films.
Masses.
I mean, that's what zombie movies are referring to.
That's right.
To the rich people and their fear that the poor will rise up against them. And but I think really it's a great movie because it gets all these things right that we've seen so many times people can get wrong. And it managed to tell that story in in a way that respected the material and not just tried to play it for, gore and fun.
Yeah, that point about class analysis is really good. Ryan or Austin, do you all see that theme as well? Is this something that you've seen in other movies of the genre that you think they do well here?
I certainly have heard that sort of line before. Like in terms of the first movie, though, I think back like on Night of the Living Dead. I mean, weren't those like basically two? I mean, were they rich people like in the townhouse, like in the middle of nowhere that were getting attacked? Because I mean, I'm just thinking like if anyone would know George A. Romero, I mean, what does he say? I haven't read enough interviews with him. Like, does he have? Does he confirm that notion? I guess, or
I think the argument is generally drawn along the lines of it's more about like the unconscious fear of controlling the order of capitalist society, whereas vampires are, Dracula is a fucking aristocrat, and it's
sucking blood from the working classes, like literally
That's right.
feasting on lower forms
That's
of
right.
life to keep the aristocracy flowing.
Like Peter Thiel, who's literally like infusing his blood from fucking other people so he can live forever. And
real
shit
thing.
like
Look
that.
it up.
Just like werewolf movies are about the inherent fear of menstruating women.
okay. Explain.
Wait a second. Hold on. Unpack that. I don't doubt it. I'm just curious. I need to see the logic here. What?
Well, werewolf movies are about this fear we have that when the moon is right, someone is going to get much hairier and angrier in a way that doesn't make sense, and then everyone will pay the price, and then they'll turn back into a person, and you can't blame them.
Dude, Dave, you are showing me the meaning so hard right now.
Yeah,
show me the meaning.
Wow, so much meaning has been shown thus far, and we're only 25 minutes in.
So into the zombie metaphor, like if they're the proletariat, so they're supposed to be the idiots, and they're eating the brains of the rich, the smart people. Is that a metaphor? I'm just coming up in my head.
Well, very few zombie movies actually eat brains. That was it's basically just one movie, right? That kind of.
Well, I mean, Dawn of the Dead, I mean, well, I guess they're eating their guts and stuff too. I mean, they're kind of just eating everything a lot of times.
It's been a while since they were specifically after brains.
Well, then I wonder if we're looking at the zombies as the proletariat class engaged in an act of self-liberation, then I wonder if we can look at the opening of this film, pointing out what happens when well-educated Cambridge kids try to do the work of liberation for the proletariat by breaking in there, and how these PETA activists who think they're doing something good end up making things way worse.
Well, there is a story there about don't assume that well-intentioned, extremely excited white kids know what they're talking about.
Yes.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. And I love that we get that.
I think that means that I need to shut up then for the rest of the episode. Is that the point?
Oh no, go for it. No.
No, I do love that angle though, because there's clearly some sort of like critique of what like animal anarchist liberation types, right?
Well, to be fair, also they weren't the ones who created a virus and gave it to it.
Right.
They're just the ones who were dumb enough to free him.
Right, which is like you just said, they're well-intentioned, but the ultimate critique is there's kind of like a Frankenstein critique, right? Like human beings fucking with nature, kind of modifying things, and then what happens through, complexity theory or chaos, like things happen and then it spreads and it gets wild. But then there is that interesting thing then, so is there not just the like humanity is the problem all along, but is there also kind of the flip side of that, which is a sort of maybe a fetishization or a romanticization of nature, that nature has this purity in itself and we just need to emulate it. So I'm thinking of those horses again, that scene that I mentioned before. I think there's 4 of them perfectly because there are 4 humans that are on this road trip, and it's almost like they need to just map onto the real natural harmony that they perceive in nature, and they can potentially fabricate that or mimic that if they just kind of get their shit right? Like the 4 of them can figure it out. And you think maybe they can do it, and then of course a shitty circumstance because of a human blood drop that gets into Brendan Gleeson's eye and it kind of disrupts it. Yeah.
Which is also very prescient now because of how the level of care you have to take to not get infected with something, and how the precautions that people are expected to make that some people just don't want to make. That's something that comes up. You'll notice that more now. The idea of just avoiding this. I mean, it also begs the question of why whenever you watch zombie movies, you're like, number one, why don't you just go where it's cold?
Yeah.
And two, like, because if aside from that, like, how about, stop walking around in a t-shirt? Like, all you would have to do is put on a jean jacket and you're fucking invincible. And no one thinks to do that. No one thinks to just do, like, they're idiots. They don't know how to deal with anything.
Those fuckers can bite through a jean jacket, though. I mean, they're fucking.
Well, okay. What about motorcyclists?
Right now, take your jeans and bite through them.
I don't have the rage in me. I don't have the rage that these zombies have. They'll just keep going.
Okay, but let's substitute Ryan jeans for a leather jacket. A Harley crew. You got gloves, leather, helmet, motorcycle where you can weave through all the cars.
I agree. I'm getting a fucking.
The Hell's
hazmat
Angels
suit.
were fine. They're
Yeah.
fine with this shit. Bring it on.
Yeah, they're the ones that control the resources in the post-apocalyptic world. That's why Mad Max needs to be tied into this as well, right? It's fucking motorcycle gangs that become the new overlords.
Yeah.
I'm getting a
here's
bubble boy ball.
Here's a question for you all as well. Is there something to be said for, and we don't see this in the film, but there's commentary about it, the way in which they basically say, like, the news talked about it. At first it wasn't that bad. Then the news went dark. Is that a commentary on the way in which we don't have the imagination or the ability to properly conceive of and deal with, like, a pandemic? Because it's hard to hear the way they talk about the emergence and the attempt at containment of this and not think about how, like, countries like America and the United Kingdom have currently done with the pandemic that's happening.
To be honest, go for it.
I think it's really about just the general fear we have of the system breaking down, of the idea that, like, we have so much reliance on this system we've created, and that a monkey wrench could just screw it all up. And then suddenly, and then when the news isn't talking about, and you can't talk about something anymore, and things just go dark, then you're just like, oh, this is a world that we've never even imagined could happen, and how terrifying that is to just be really on your own.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, it's like that plus how quickly it can go down. Because, I mean, it's in the fucking title. 28 days later, it's like everything was normal, and then 28 days later, the Murphy White wakes up to that, to everything's gone. And it's just kind of like, even this Corona thing has really made me think about that. Like, I was thinking about, like, 2 months ago, would we ever have fucking thought that, the next 2 months would have happened how they happened? I don't think we would have. I was kind of freaking out earlier than a lot of my friends. I'm like getting, supplies, snacks, toilet paper, and all this shit. And everyone's telling me I'm fucking a weirdo. And 28 days later, they're all doing the same shit. So
there's a cool formal element at the beginning of the film that kind of relates to this, and I think it juxtaposes, like, silence. And maybe we could say, like, government or media ineptitude, but then also with this really jarring, chaotic soundtrack, right? And it's when Cillian Murphy is first going through the streets. And I could only think, like, I've been in London. I lived outside of London. I was in London a lot. It's noisy and it's busy all the time, right? And so you get this dude who's, he's a bicycle, like, delivery guy or something?
Yeah.
Courier, yeah. So he's used to being on those streets. He's used to being in the noise and the traffic and the chaos and the life, if you will, the vitality. And then all of a sudden, it's just dead. And, like, the silence is basically deafening. And then the kind of irony of that is that the soundtrack is, like, pumped up beyond a 10. It's like 11 or a 12, And it's this, like, screeching guitar track, like, that is really kind of upsetting, almost like aesthetically upsetting. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting way to frame the discomfort and the anxiety that he's waking up to.
Yeah, the soundtrack is really good because it mimics the panic that people would be feeling in that situation.
totally.
Which is interesting, because, like, the panic of silence is jarring, right? And I think that's what's kind of that weird tension that you get at that in those opening scenes that I really love, because it basically makes me feel upset. That's the thing that kind of, like, got me more in this viewing than any of the other stuff about, like, fast zombies. Like, that was all, like, early stuff, but the fact that it was just so formally interesting with what they were doing that I was like, oh yeah, that's the shit that I found cool.
Yeah, and so many zombie movies are also just shot like TV. They're just shot so crappy that, for something like this, you need that level of cinematography. You need to be immersed in it. It's just, when you watch a zombie movie, like, and it just, everything's well lit and everything, like, it looks like a sitcom. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I don't know. Ryan, you might know better. I can't remember the name. Dave, you might know. Mike, you might know. But the cinematographer's name was like Mantle or something. But he's been the cinematographer for Thomas Vinterberg, Lars von Trier. He's done a couple of other Danny Boyle's films. He's like a fucking accomplished cinematographer. And I was like, oh fuck, that's why this like kind of lowery budget film kind of has that grainy look to it. But then there are these really cool cuts. And then like I mentioned that bit where they're driving through the poppy fields or whatever it is. And there's like that surreal veneer that's over them. So there's some really interesting cinematic stuff that is also like technically that could probably be attributable to the cinematographer too that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think technically just a really impressive film all around because along with that, like this came up before, the sound design was great. I watched the movie listening to it in headphones. And it was like an anxiety-inducing soundtrack. There's random like voices and sounds that are kind of in the back of your headphones if you're listening to it that way that keep you worried that something fucked up is about to happen at any point, which I found unsettling but made it a really engaging experience. Yeah.
Can I, Dave? I mean, it's obvious, but if we could just kind of talk about it, like what made you want to do this film? You know, have you been thinking about this film, or like have you been did you watch like Contagion recently? Like, is it the Corona inspired stuff? Like, what was up? Yeah.
No, the truth is, I don't really like movies like this that often. I'm not that big into the genre. I mostly only like horror movies when there's something else about them that makes them so good, like if it's a comedy or something also. But I think that zombies are at least a more satisfying version of a horror movie for me. And it just rung as like a movie that managed to do right what so many couldn't. And it also seemed like, I wanted to list movies that weren't just comedies and weren't superhero movies, which is essentially the only thing I watch.
So do you like the comedy zombie movies like Zombieland and like
or did you see One Cut of the Dead?
And Shaun of the Dead are both really good movies.
Did you see One Cut of the Dead yet? Highly recommend that one if you're into comedy.
Is that the one that's the
movies.
Japanese film?
This sucks, but I don't know the fucking country. But it's definitely
it's about them
American.
like making a zombie movie, but then a real zombie apocalypse breaks out.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, my buddy just told me about this. It's supposed to be fucking amazing.
Yeah, it's about them making the zombie movie. Yeah, basically, it's awesome if you're into that.
Yeah,
genre.
and the directors basically like just fucking go with it or whatever, and they all start like a real zombie apocalypse breaks out.
Yeah, it's one of the best movies about making movies too. If you're into that subgenre too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I also love Army of Darkness.
Oh fuck yeah, that's top 5 for me, dude.
Which is a comedy zombie movie.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So usually that's more what got me into this sort of genre anyway. And but also the thing about zombie movies that are it's just so much more fun than horror movies is the offensive nature of it. Almost every horror movie I've ever seen is just about, in a way, it's just victim porn. It's just about putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's running from something, which is fine if that's what you enjoy. But with zombie movies, there's way more offense involved. There's a sense of competition. It's like watching a fight.
Maybe that's why, like, when I watch a zombie
film, like Zombieland, for example, I like want to be in it. You know, like I think we talked about it on this podcast. The scene where they go to like the American Indian store and they start like just fucking shit up because it's just total freedom. It reminds me of the bit when in 28 Days Later, which clearly Zombieland is retreading a lot of the same terrain. But in 28 Days Later, where they go to the grocery store and it's just like there's this fucking freedom to get whatever you want. And Brendan Gleeson goes to Cillian Murphy at one point who's going to buy booze and he's like, no, come on. You got to get the good shit, right? And there's like this weird like ability to court to like seduce our investment into wanting to be in the world. Whereas when I watch other horror films, you don't want to be in the world. Like you just said, it is victim porn. It is a type of maybe a catharsis, which is probably why Cabin in the Woods was such an interesting film, because it kind of like directly attacks the audience's love and fetishization of horror films. But like zombie films like really are seductive to me.
Yeah, because they enter into a fantasy that pretty much everyone has of a lawless world where there's no moral responsibility to what you're doing. That nothing you're doing is wrong because they're not people anymore. But it still exploits the kind of natural aggressive instinct you have to fight that was just part of evolution.
Yeah.
I do have one thing to say, and Michael, you're going to appreciate this because it's actually a mutual friend of ours. A mutual friend of ours told me this, and I'm just going to say his initials, but JVH told me this one time. He said, the funny thing is we have all of these examples of apocalyptic films, and it always goes back to, like you just said, a state of lawlessness. It's like this Hobbesian state of nature, right? That life is just competitive and brutal, and you just look at most of them, that's the post-apocalyptic world, even from novels like The Road, to Walking Dead, to all of like the Mad Maxes and shit like that. And he said, actually though, but we do have an historical example of a post-apocalyptic world. He said, and it's Japan. Like, Japan had 2 nuclear bombs dropped on it, and Japan is not some lawless world, but actually it's like this crazy technocratic, bureaucratic world where you work like 16 hours a day. Everyone's into hentai porn. You kind of sleep in these tiny little pods and shit like that. He's like, the post-apocalyptic world isn't some Hobbesian state of nature. It's actually like this crazy technocratic, bureaucratic, neo-feudal society. And I was like, that's kind of interesting to think about.
Well, the thing about what you bring up about Japan and Japanese culture that's so interesting is that the reason Japanese culture is in many ways people would describe as very unique is because it was created almost from whole cloth after World War II, because they had to abandon what was the crux of their society, which was domination. They were for so many years, Japan was so imperialist and so unimaginably cruel in how they did so, that they had to reinvent themselves entirely. And so it makes sense that things would be so weird, to an outsider, because this is all of this that we think of as Japanese culture, so much of it had to kind of be improvised in a fairly short amount of time because, they got nuclear bombed after decades of brutalizing all of Asia. So, I mean, it's so hard to look at Japan now. And, I know, I've dated a girl from Japan. I know her whole family. And it's like they're just such nice people. And it's like it's hard to even imagine, like, a few generations ago, you were the most ambitious conquerors in the 20th century.
Mm.
So maybe when they make the 3rd sequel 28 years later, it'll just be Japan, because it's just like this is what happens after 28 years of this shit.
But even in like the movie we're talking about, it's interesting that this is England, a culture that also like Evan, Austin's lives in England. I lived in England for a while. I guess I'll offend some people, but like, come find me, I guess, if you want to travel during this, you idiots. But like, this is a country that dominated the entire world for generations and generations. And you're in England now, and I don't see a lot of that. You don't meet a modern English person and think, wow, I can see how your ancestors took over the entire globe. So there is that sense too that, Britain is a fallen empire, a place that used to have that sort of colonial domination over the world. So it's fun to see him fall in that way. And it's fun to consider, England against that backdrop.
But
are you saying that they've lost their acquisitive spirit?
Is that what you're saying, Michael?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Dave, what do you think?
I don't see British culture as nearly as divorced from its past as Japan's, though.
Yeah, I think they're delusional about their past. I think England has this weird, they hold on to it to make them feel better. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble. But they hold on to it to make them feel better about the lack of what has been going on since the end of World War II. So I think, yeah, you're right in that sense. They do embrace
it's because England's loss of an empire was not a result of their imperialism. Mm-hmm. It was coincidental. It was about It was about someone else doing an evil act. So it's like after all these generations of all the things that England did, they ended up losing their power in a way that made them look good as opposed to a rebellion. Because don't forget, during World War II and even before World War II, Japan had an opportunity their plan was to get all of Asia to rise up against British imperialism. And the only reason they didn't get to do that was because they invaded these other countries in Asia and treated them worse than the British had, which was just a terrible, terrible miscalculation and about lack of control of the troops they had. So that ended up making it that if they had not done that, they could have easily organized all of Asia to rise up against England and been much more powerful.
Yeah, and I think just for anyone listening, a reminder, this is Normandy the Meaning, Wisecrack's new World War II history podcast, where we dive deep into the structures and relationships of countries in World War II. That's super interesting. I think you're spot on with England there. And yeah, and England, of course, got to do that thing where they like gave back countries that they colonized and got credit for being the good guys and doing that, which is like, that's really impressive if you can do it. Like if you could steal something from someone and then return it, they hug you.
They have cover of the Axis.
So good.
Yeah, well, that's what to tie this. to tie this back into like the post-apocalyptic thing, the interesting thing is this film kind of puts you in the scenario of what would the UK be like if it did experience an apocalyptic tragedy or event, right? And again, they fall into that, which is again very English, because Hobbes was fucking English, and kind of the liberal ethos of ideology dominates the Western world. What would the world look like? It would just be back to like liberal individualism, where everyone's trying to scramble together to create some semblance of community that was just like it was. And we actually have a writer at Wisecrack, Leo, who's talked about this, that there's like a failure of the Western imagination to actually conceive of a post-apocalyptic world that isn't some nostalgic clamoring back for the way things were. So, like, I've been playing this game called Death Stranding a little bit, and one of the things that's interesting about this game is that the whole underlying designing principle is to, like, get the United States back. Right? It's like the United States has been fragmented and the world is destroyed and there are these cities, but like you're part of this revolution, which is not really a revolution because it's a nostalgic reactionary mentality to try to get back to the way things were. And so much of apocalyptic film kind of fits within that ethos, that it's like, well, if we can just get back to the way things were, let's restore balance, let's restore the capitalist liberal democratic ethos. And that's what's kind of an underlying ideology that might kind of speak to what somebody like Mark Fisher calls capitalist realism, that you can't even imagine an alternative. Or like someone like Zizek following Frederick Jameson says, you know, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, right? There's always that desire to go back to the way things were just before the apocalypse, rather than some genuine novel creation of something different.
It's because capitalism doesn't need to be implemented. It will occur in the absence of other systems. So that's why it's so much harder to kind of think of a story where all these disconnected people could find an alternative to it. I mean, that's what happened in China. They weren't capitalist, and it just kind of happened because it's sort of the natural order of how people interact and competition.
We like freedom, baby.
Well, kind of along these lines then, do you think the film is trying to say something, or to ask y'all what the film is trying to say by the two different responses we see from the two crews we get in this movie? We have the ex-army dudes and we have our crew of survivors, very different approaches to surviving this pandemic, different ideas to how they can like create solutions to it. Is there some meaning there? Is Boyle trying to say something, tell us something, warn us of something in that? Or is it just that dudes want to do army cosplay?
Are you trying to get us into like an abolish the police, defund the police conversation, Michael? Is that what you're trying to bring up right now?
How dare you?
I'm not.
Well, for one, I wouldn't say Danny Boyle so much, but we haven't said his name yet on the podcast, but Alex Garland, awesome filmmaker, wrote this script. I think this is one of his first ones. He's the guy behind like Ex Machina and Never Look Back, the Mark Romanek movie, and a few others. And Devs, if you've watched that on Netflix or anything. But
and Annihilation, right?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. That's a good one. But yeah, here's a quote from him about this film that maybe if you want to get jump-started on your answers based on this. But he says, if there's an infinite amount... Oh, I'm sorry, that's a different fucking... Oh, God damn it. Hold on. Editor, take this little pause out.
Leave it in. No, show them the warts and all.
Alex Garland says this about 28 days later. He says, if you look at the whole life of the planet and man has only been around for a few blinks of the eye in terms of the life of the planet. So if the infection wipes us out, that's a return to normalcy. Kind of like how you were saying, like, are they yearning to go back to life, or it's just the planet yearning to go back to life, or is Alex Garland trying to say he wishes that we all went back to the natural order of things? Anyway, what do y'all think about that?
That's really interesting. So there's a philosopher by the name of Ray Brassier who is sometimes considered like a cosmic nihilist or something like that. But one of the things that he talks about is that we need to think about the world from the perspective of like heat death, that it's absolutely coming. Right? That the whole world, the whole universe is just going to disperse into fucking just dark matter kind of doing its thing. And so we need to think about that cold reality. Yeah, and so there's something interesting maybe in what Garland is saying there too, that like the quote unquote natural is that maybe like we are the virus. It's kind of like that we are the virus logic that you heard a lot of that came out when...
It's been around for 3 months now.
Yeah, which is interesting, but I worry that it teeters into something that's called eco-fascism, right? There is a political ideology that comes out of this that is, I think, a little bit worrying, and I think it also is fundamentally rooted in a philosophical incoherence of kind of like what's called the naturalist fallacy a lot of times as well. But I'm not saying there's nothing interesting in that. I just think that ultimately that if we take it ethically and politically as some sort of idea that we ought to uphold, that there are some potential pitfalls, so... exactly.
I think the story is a very simple one, really, about the inherent evil of man, and about how that evil is relative.
Yeah,
and that
totally.
Your enemies are only your enemies while they're your enemies, and that it's also the idea that like man is evil even in the face of like this seemingly ultimate evil of this disease, but even then, sometimes man is so evil you must use this disease against him. And it sort of implies just the way that Killiam has to become a zombie to do what's right. He must act like a zombie to do what's right. It as a metaphor for the idea that this virus itself may be evil to us, but not evil to everyone who's not a person.
Yeah, it's the definition also between survival too. Everyone has a difference on like what it takes to survive, and then some people are like, "Well, that's evil." It's like, no, that's me surviving. What do you want me to fucking do? It's like the road, It's like we're either gonna eat these people or we're all dying. What do you want me to do? So
what do you think the conclusion of this film is? Like, are we left with a kind of happy ending? I mean, obviously we know that there's a sequel 28 weeks later, but there's no cure to the disease. But is there a sense in which that like, okay, there's chaos, there's death, there's pandemic, there's disease, there's rage, all this shit. But if you just have your family, your people that can, like, is that kind of this, like, what's the conclusion? Like, there's this romantic relationship too, which we haven't talked about at all. Yeah. Like, what do you think?
I mean, it struck me that that's kind of the case because all the army dudes were willing to turn on each other, shoot each other down, treat each other like shit. We see how it turns out for them. And then our trio of survivors has a sort of familial dynamic. We have a little romance story. We have a sort of adopting Hannah after her father dies and treating her and taking care of her in that way. And then, of course, we see them in their country cottage together, living this sort of like familial
the bourgeois fantasy.
life. Yeah, so I think, at least once again, I've seen it once. Y'all have seen it probably 20 times between the three of you. But that was my read on the ending message of things, or at least the Hollywood gloss on that.
Another friend of ours, and I'll just do the initials again, APS once told me we were sitting at a bar in England, and he was talking about how the kind of bourgeois middle-class fantasy is to go out into the countryside and just have your kind of little home and to escape into nature. And that if you can escape into nature, that's salvation. Away from the city, because that's where degradation occurs, that's where all the violence occurs. But if you can get out into the Lake District and have your nuclear family, then that's salvation is.
That's the social media account of every well-to-do New Yorker for the past 3 months who's just like posting front-facing videos from their cottage upstate or whatever. And it's like, oh, fuck you guys. Well, yeah. I don't know. What do y'all think about the ending of the film and what the message is, or if there is a message at all?
Well, originally he was supposed to die. That was
because aren't there a bunch of alternate endings to this?
Yeah. There's alternate endings, and there's one ending that they storyboarded. I'm trying to remember that was just about curing the disease. It doesn't even have soldiers in it, which is kind of nuts. But yeah, I mean, it was originally going to be a sadder ending where he dies, and every filmmaker wants to hurt the audience, and the audience is usually just like, we don't have to feel bad to enjoy this. So,
I wonder if that was the studio, right? Danny Boyle is British, and British filmmakers love the pessimistic ending, especially if you're more kind of like indie, like Danny Boyle is. But then the studio comes along and they're like, no, we need to feed people a happy pill. So,
well, it's also, I think, about survival. It's about the idea that things you can persevere and that humanity can still be around if we get rid of the problems, and that that there is room to get better is I think part of the storyline.
That glimmer of hope.
Yeah, but I mean at the same time, it's also like he lived because of probably test audiences, because they just wanted a movie, which is okay. Yeah. Especially because not every filmmaker knows exactly where things should go. Like I said, I think there's an unnatural sense of wanting to hurt people's feelings when you make a movie to be powerful, and it's easier to affect someone when you use death or pain.
Absolutely.
Well, let's do final thoughts on this then before we wrap up. Before we do a little discussion and a little plug sesh at the end. Any final thoughts on this movie? Reasons you think people should watch it if they haven't, watch it again if they didn't like it the first time around, ideas that we didn't get to during this discussion. The floor is y'all's. Austin, you look content.
All I would say is that it's probably my mid-level Danny Boyle. I'm a big Danny Boyle guy, and I think that he's made
What's your favorite?
Trainspotting, for sure, still.
Okay.
But
did you like T2?
T2?
Yeah, this sequel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was thinking of Terminator 2.
Yeah, my brain went to the original T2. Not really, honestly.
Okay, yeah.
It's okay. But anyway.
Yeah, Dave, final 28 Days Later thoughts, if you got them.
It's a good movie. I think if you like other zombie things, you should know where a lot of those ideas really came from.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And this is fun. And I'm glad that I watched it, a movie that I probably wouldn't have watched on my own. So this is the time where we, want to wrap things up and plug some stuff. But I think someone has a thing that's more important to plug than anything Ryan, Austin, or myself have. Dave, you are here because we're excited to have you and want to talk about this movie. Also because you are one of the writers of a movie that's coming out, correct me if I'm wrong, June 12th, King of Staten Island, a film that you worked on with Judd Apatow and Pete Davidson. And you seem very excited to talk about it.
That's true. Well, no, I mean, the honest truth was that, like, I have these interviews that, I'm happy to do, and, it's part of my job, and I really enjoy doing it. But at the same time, like, I've really not wanted to go around advertising a movie right now because, frankly, there's more important things going on. And, like, I don't even like the idea of trying to, like, say that you should be thinking about this movie. And I hope it entertains people and hope they like it. But, we never intended that it would come out in the middle of worldwide protest against police racism. So, that's what people should be concentrating on. Mm-hmm. If you want to watch a movie, I hope you like it. But, it really is one of those things where it's just like, I know how important this movie is, which is not, it's not the important thing for anyone to be worried about right now. So it's like,
Was there any talk about delaying it, or was it too far down the road to try to delay it?
Not that I know of. I don't believe that there was any real option once those things are kind of in motion. My understanding was there wasn't much you could do because it was already moved, and it's such a big company, and there's so many moving parts that I don't really know how that could be possible, what would be possible, but it was also a thing of like It's not like we're trying to compete. We're not trying to say that like you should care about this instead of something. We're just saying it's out and it'll still be there, when everything settles down, and hopefully there's progress that comes out of the protests, and hopefully that there's real change that comes out of it. The movie is just there to help anyone relax when they're done dealing with the more important issues of the day.
I think that's really important, though, and I think it's important that during this time there's so much heaviness in the world, and I know many people are so passionate and active with everything that's happening. But even the most passionate and active person does have to sit on their couch every now and then and turn their brain off from everything that's happening and get lost in films, television, and literature. So I think people, if you need that, this is a movie that you can watch. And I know personally, as a fan of Apatow films in general, it's fun to see. I guess the Judd Apatow style film with a very different context, very different lead and that sort of thing out of the like suburban Hollywood world with like Paul Rudd hanging out and stuff like that. So definitely, like Dave says,
movie. Yeah, it's a different movie than Judd's ever done. It's I think I think it's an ambitious kind of non-traditional comedy. And, I hope that people who see it like it. If it's a choice between buying my movie or donating to Campaign Zero, you should donate. But if you want to watch the movie, I will be very happy if you like it.
I totally feel you, man. And I watched it actually a couple of days ago when we were originally going to have this podcast. So I'm somebody who saw it and liked it. And the one thing I wanted to say was that the part that really hit home for me was the monologue about bed bugs. As a bedbug survivor, I appreciated that being in there.
Mike Vecchione would be very happy to hear that.
Okay.
But he got to do his bedbugs line. That's his bread and butter line.
Oh, okay. So that wasn't even in the script?
No, it was. I'm just saying that it
Oh, you mean his performance of it?
It's like the only good thing Mike got to do. It's like the one like really, it was because Mike's a really funny comic, and that was like kind of the one moment where like we let him really have fun and be Mike Vecchione and really be funny. And I was happy that we got there because we hired a lot of comedians that we know. We wanted to, make sure that people were hooked up, like that, we gave a lot of people their first time on camera. And I think when people see the movie, there are a lot of people who you've never seen probably before in a movie that, you'll see like have a real star quality, like Ricky Velez, Moises, and Derek Gaines. Remember, Derek was Zoots, who is so goddamn funny. You might know Derek from Last OG. He is one of the funniest people I've ever seen in my life. He's the guy with the Hulk hands.
Oh yeah, hell yeah! At the
I got a question. I got for a West Coast boy like myself, grew up in L.A. and Orange County. I don't really understand why people shit on Staten Island so much. Like, I kind of get it, right? Like, I can get it abstractly. And I've heard some of, like, Pete's stand-up before where he's, like, being self-deprecating. But you're from Jersey, and I know Jersey and Staten Island are oftentimes shit on by, like, Brooklyn Manhattanites. So, like, can you just briefly, like, what's the deal? Why do people shit on Staten Island so much?
Well, you just explained it, because it's a lot more like Jersey than Brooklyn. But it's
okay.
But it's still New York City, because Staten Island is New York City. It's the only place in New York where you can have a lawn. But people think of it as much more of a suburban kind of place. It's it's the whitest part of New York City. It's the reddest part in terms of voting. So I think that it's the least metropolitan borough, I think, is where people shit on it. And it's a very nice place and great food and great people, but it gets the same shit Jersey does. And don't forget, the Jersey Shore, which we all love making fun of.
Oh yeah.
Majority of those people were from Staten Island, not New Jersey. They drove to New Jersey.
That's their vacation place.
The beaches are better.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Jersey Shore, too, is great. I saw the show, and then I lived in Maryland for a bit and spent some time on the Jersey Shore, and the TV warped my mind. It's pleasant as all hell. Great people. Good food. Nice beaches. Sorry to, let the cat out of the bag there, but yeah.
I was going to say, too, I kind of got this analogy between Staten Island bros and, Simi Valley bros or, Orange County bros, Huntington Beach bros. There's kind of an analogous relation, yeah?
Yeah, no, I mean, I lived in LA for many, many years. I know that, there's the same kind of people everywhere. In Staten Island, they're Italian. In LA, they're Armenian. It's not a big deal. So, everyone, that in terms of people who get made fun of unfairly, I meant, honestly.
Hey, man, I fucking love Glendale, okay? Don't talk shit. No,
I love that.
To also make a comment about your comment on the movie, I just love in general movies that really embrace non-professional actors, bring in new, obviously you could tell that some of these people were Pete's buddies or just people that you guys knew in general. Like you said, you brought on a bunch of comics, like the guy, the tattoo artist that he goes into, and the guy who's tattooing the big hulking dude.
I mean,
oh yeah, is that Machine Gun Kelly? See, I don't even know. I'm not familiar with
That's the Nazi.
Yeah, exactly. That's the guy. Okay.
I drew all those tattoos.
Did you really?
Whoa.
That was my other job on the movie.
Well, see, awesome. He probably hasn't acted that much, obviously, right? He's more into music.
Machine Gun Kelly? He's been in a few things now. He was in Bird Box.
Okay.
Things, yeah.
Well, I don't know what I'm talking about.
He plays Tommy Lee in the Motley Crue film, I think, on Netflix.
Nice. Okay, so he's got some credits. Well, but there are some other people that are non-actors, right, in the film, or at least it seemed that way. Kind of got like an uncut, the Safdie brothers or something. How they'll cast just people they meet on the streets. It seemed like you guys kind of had that vibe a little bit with Pete's life.
I mean, most of them were actors, but there was a lot. We wanted to use, comics. We wanted to load it up with comics. Like a lot of the people who are, some of our favorite, comedians. We wanted to just really kind of give those opportunities and just let funny people be funny. Aunt Joy, Lynn plays. She plays Marissa Tomei's sister.
Oh yeah, okay,
She's a brilliant comedian. One of the biggest female comedians from before female comics really got a decent shake. She was one of the first ones to have a real special in the early 2000s before there was a real boom and there was a lot of attention being paid. There's a lot of people like that you'll just see. A lot of comedians, a lot of Keith Robinson is so good as the security guard. There's just a lot. If you're a New York comedy fan, you're constantly being reminded of people that are really funny in the movie.
Well, that's awesome.
It was just so good.
Yeah. Bill Burr, low-key, kind of a good actor.
Good actor, right?
It's great.
Yeah,
He's fucking great.
He's
fucking
intense,
great.
dude. It's great.
Yeah, he is fucking great. And I'll be honest too. Like, just the last thing I'll say is I was actually really impressed with Pete Davidson as an actor. Obviously, he's got like this kind of charming charisma. This, like, I talked about his self-deprecation earlier, that kind of almost makes him attractive to like want to attune ourselves to. But there's like a humility, but also a kind of broiness about him, and I think that's what's so interesting. It's like he's perpetually on the cusp of enlightenment. Like, you never know if he's going to say something just totally basic or say something that's like, oh, that's fucking really cool, man. So I love that about him. He's constantly like walking that fine line, and I think his character in this film was really interesting because of that, and I was really impressed with the way he pulled it off, which I was not expecting.
No, I'm glad to hear that. I think I forgot who it was, but someone described him as he's a great non-actor in the idea that like he's kind of unconscious up there. He is just in the moment. He is completely in the moment, and that's why he's able to pull this off. And it's like it was really great to see him acting, and it's really exciting because as time goes on, we're going to see him out of his comfort zone more, because obviously this was as much him playing himself as you could imagine. Pete is in Suicide Squad 2. That's already known, and I was on the set of that. It's gonna be that movie looks so goddamn good.
Dude, James Gunn, I believe in him, man.
I know if he'll do it. Yeah, for real.
I was not a fan of Suicide Squad 1.
Me neither.
And, this movie looks so. I mean, just the scene that I got to be there to watch them shoot was so funny. I'm so excited for that movie.
If he can give it that Logan treatment, then it's going to be fucking awesome.
This is good. We all need reasons to stay alive, move forward, and have some hope that there'll be some good stuff coming out. So that's awesome to hear. And Dave, thank you so much for letting us talk to you about the film. We heard what you said, but also, people that listen to this podcast probably do turn to movies and turn to film as a way to cope and feel better, and even just take a break from the world. So this is a movie you can do that with, and we really appreciate that. So before we wrap up, Austin, Ryan, where can people find you if after this they're longing for more of you in their lives and they have an Austin or Ryan shaped hole in their heart?
You can hit me up on Twitter. At Ryan's Game Show. At Ryan's Game Show.
You got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and he posts videos on YouTube all the time.
Check me out at Owls at Dawn. It's every week or every month now, Austin?
Every week. Every week.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. That covers us.
Wow. Dave, do you have a social media or anything?
All my social media is Dave Sirus, DaveSirus. Check out. I'm not sure what day it comes out, but when you see you'll be seeing something with Triumph the Insult Comic Dog on Funny or Die coming out any day. I think it was already supposed to come out, but it should come out very soon. We did something very fun with a lot of very, very fun, famous people that people should enjoy.
Amazing. Tell Triumph I said what's up.
And then you shouldn't, but if anyone wants to, I'm Michael O. Burns on social media stuff, and then I run a comedy Twitch stream. It's at twitch.tv/GodseyandBurns, but we're taking a break because the world is really serious right now, so we've done some stuff on the show, like interview some activists and stuff like that until we get back making dumb jokes. But this has been Show Me the Meaning. Dave, thank you so much again for joining us.
Man, thanks a lot for
Ryan.
stopping by.
Hey,
thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah, thank you. Austin, Ryan, thank you for being on as always. This has been Show Me the Meaning on 28 Days. We'll catch you later.
Goodbye from Hollywood, California. Actually, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee right now, but whatever.